Good morning. This is a continuation of the infant and toddler nutrition lectures or module for Nutrition 4365. So this topic is on complementary feeding, and we'll go over what this is about. These are two pandemic kids before their father cut their hair with a buzzer. Okay, so his got really long before it got cut off. So they're eating their complementary foods of fruit. Okay, so what we're going to talk about here, I like to do outlines because I think it helps you organize your information. So I'm going to give a little background on complementary feeding, then the importance or background, normal growth and development, importance of complementary feeding, and the history of what we know about this and why it's a problem. Then we'll talk about feeding practices, some nutrient requirements, when and what to feed kids, how to do it, and provide some sample menus and food issues about food safety and other health issues that may occur. Like for young kids, some things like diarrhea and constipation are problematic. So we'll talk about just some normal things that can be addressed with nutrition. So this outline here goes for this part 1 and also part 2 of the complementary feeding lectures. Okay, so background first. It's helpful to remember how much kids grow. In the first 0 to 6 months, they double their weight by about 6 months, and by the time they're a year, they triple their birth weight. So an 8-pound baby is going to be 24 pounds by the end of the first year. So think about the growth, especially at first, they grow so fast, and they gain a lot, and then their weight gain and their growth slows down as they get older, which is normal. And toddlers, something to think about, I apologize. Toddlers, something to think about is that the brain cell number peaks at about 18 months. So that means up until that time, actually starting from prior to conception through the pregnancy and through these first several months, the brains are growing. And for brain growth to happen, you need to have adequate calories, adequate protein, adequate nutrients. So basically, good nutrition is really critical during this period of time. Now, people continue to add mass to the brain, but this is considered a critical period of development in which nutrition is particularly important. And what that means is if toddlers are not fed adequate amounts of calories, especially for infants and toddlers for a particular period, or for a longer period of time, that may dampen their brain growth. So they don't develop their brain as much as they would, and they can't make up for it later. Okay, so that's why we care so much about nutrition during this time. And the growth for toddlers, you can see it's about 1 centimeters per month. And then preschoolers slow down a little bit, and so on. Okay, what about complementary feeding? This is the entire title of this lecture. This is one of the biggest issues in public health nutrition in the nation. What are we feeding our kids the first couple of years? It's how do we transfer them from formula breast milk to real food can affect their entire life. So let's take a moment to talk about how important this is. So complementary foods are the first foods and beverages fed to infants along with breast milk or formula. You remember, we talked about breastfeeding a lot. You want exclusive breastfeeding till around 6 months, and then the addition of healthful complementary foods. And we need those foods for a variety of reasons. One is the nutrients they provide. And we'll talk about more of that today, but we've already talked about key nutrients such as iron. Also, during this time, infants learn so much. They learn more about food during the first 2 years of life than they will for the rest of it. They learn about the process of eating, they learn about taste, they learn about managing foods, they develop complicated abilities to use their mouth and use their hands. And so they learn so much, and they can learn to like foods, So they can learn like healthy foods, or they can also develop unhealthful habits depending on what they're being fed. That brings me to number 3, dietary habits may track through a child's life. Studies have shown that if the kids really need their fruits and vegetables during that first year, and lots of exposures to different textures so that they're open about not just wanting sweet, salty foods. I don't know if you guys do this back in the olden days when we went to restaurants, but I've seen families all over the board with this. Some of them giving the kids lots of healthy foods, and then families where the kids are sitting there eating potato chips, looking at a video while the parents talk. You know, and so there's opportunities to really endanger a child's health by these first few years as well. Okay, also, and I don't think people realize this enough, childhood obesity is perhaps the biggest critical issue facing the health of our nation. And that's because childhood obesity tracks into adulthood, and that affects health, long-term health, long-term earning, and so on. So we need to do everything we can to protect infants from developing obesity. And during this first 2 years, learning to eat healthful foods and not relying on the American junk food diet can make a difference. Now, ideally, you want to continue a healthful diet throughout, but these first 2 years are really critical. And it's very easy to get out of the habit of eating healthful foods, especially when people have older kids at the table. So here's an example. She's just now 2 and he's 5. And so these are smoothies. So I think these are peanut butter sandwiches. But if he's into getting treats as a 5-year-old, she's going to want them too. His family actually has a brand new baby. Okay, so what is that baby going to eat? If these guys are all eating junk by the time they're 5, then that happens to the youngest kids. So it's a critical thing to consider. Now, this is super important. This is one of the reasons we focus on this in our curriculum, is that there have never been official guidelines for feeding children in the United States, ages 0 to 24 months. Think about how crazy that is. You know, go ahead.
I was asking, why is that? Why have there never been guidelines?
Well, because it's hard, I think. And, you know, we've had the dietary guidelines for Americans. You guys all know about that, right? So the dietary guidelines start at age 2 and go up to older adults. But they've left it out. And part of the reason is it's, you know, it's complicated, but, you know, I think there may be some industry issues as well, but other countries have guidelines. So we have not had them, but we're going to. If you skip down here, the 2020 dietary guidelines, and I've seen the draft of these and read what they say about infant and toddler nutrition. They have more on pregnancy and stuff. These will, for the first time, include these recommendations. This is the B to 24 project, so y'all want to write this down. It's birth to 24 months project. Birth to 24 months. If you go to PubMed and search for B to 24, you'll find a lot of papers, because for the past several years, we knew that these dietary guidelines were finally going to include this age group. So this has been known. It's been several years, so people have been working on identifying what we need to put in here, what's the most important issues, and developing studies to really get at these questions. So we're working on it. Your nation is improving right now, hopefully. But in the meantime, so jumped ahead, but in the meantime, there's been no dietary guidelines. So now, what we've had to do in the meantime is read what organizations have provided. So I mentioned the American Academy of Pediatrics before. This is a medical organization that addresses all aspects of health, including nutrition. And then your Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, the World Health Organization, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. These guys have a vested interest in public health. All of their work is oriented towards making the world a better place and making the world be an even playing field for people. And so they have all provided guidelines. And these And so just so you know where this comes from, information this lecture is drawn from current literature and these existing guidelines. So what I was doing this morning was reading a brand new article on summarizing the European guidelines to see if they have anything in contrast to what I expect to have in our guidelines. And so this is what we do when we have time, is make sure everything we tell you is like spot on accurate. So it's important to know we haven't had guidelines until now, except for these organizations. WIC, I should have put WIC in here. WIC has some too. But we haven't had a go-to document like the Dietary Guidelines for Americans that we can always go to for policies and recommendations, but we will. So it's coming. Okay. So first part of your outline here is current infant and toddler feeding practices. And here what I'm going to do is show you what we know about what kids eat. And no one studied this until 2008. Up until then, it was a black box. What are kids in the United States eating? Oh no, who knows? You know, we didn't have a really good systematic approach, and now we've got some systematic approaches. Now, I know you're interested in who these gorgeous babies are, so I'm going to tell you. This is Miss Thornton's daughter, Hannah Thornton's daughter, Rosemary, when she was a baby. These are the same people. You know, you're stuck with my grandkids. So this is when he was little, and this is still little, but you know, getting bigger. So anyway, and what are current practices? Now, so this is what we know, and I'm just giving this to you as a background before we get started about what to eat. Okay, so cow milk and the age of introduction. And notice my headings here to differentiate these headings. I used all caps so you can see them. Let's talk about cow milk first. And we've talked a little bit about it, but let's talk some more. The guideline that was accepted guideline from all of these organizations is that kids should not consume cow milk before age 1, but be careful what you write here. Your note should say should not drink, not replace breast milk in formula with cow milk before age 1. They can taste it. They can have it in their foods. You can make them a muffin with cow milk in it. But you don't want them to be drinking volumes that replace breast milk in formula. So that's the reason, not before age 1, so that it does not replace breast milk or formula. Cow milk, if cow milk is offered before age 1 as the primary beverage, it's a primary indicator or increase, it is a primary increaser of risk for iron deficiency anemia. Cow milk interferes with iron status. So don't want them to drink appreciable volumes before age 1. Is everybody good with this? That makes sense? That's the guideline.
Dr. Crixel, I'm sorry.
Chriselle, go. You can still talk.
Oh, I'm sorry. Do you mind repeating, did you say iron deficiency anemia?
Yes, I did. Thank you. Please do this, and please tell me if I'm not clear. So yeah, we don't want to offer volumes of milk to replace breast milk or formula, because the milk then will increase risk for iron deficiency, which can lead to anemia. Yes. So this is serious. This guideline is very important. Anemia is a big issue. I told you I'd talk about it all semester. I'm not done. We're talking about it again today too. So here's a guideline, but this is what, remember, this is what is actually going on right now. This is current feeding practices. So people are not giving their little guys milk, but look at the number of people that are getting kids milk before the age of 12 months. Okay, so this is a point of education. This is how we would work with parents. We would say, you know, here's a guideline and here's why. The guideline is 12 months. The reason is they could be at risk for iron deficiency. So what do? You wait till age 1.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is that 9 to 12 months, 17%, that's them replacing breast milk, or that's them having cow's milk at all?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I think here's what it is. It's offering cow milk in a cup. Okay, so once you do that, you know, I'm pro cup feeding. We do all this sippy cup stuff, and it makes me tired sometimes because we all have so many plastic products in this world we don't need. Kids can learn to use a cup during the second 6 months of life. So, but a cup is when they're going to start consuming volume, right? So if they have a meal and they have a cup of milk, so I think that's what this means, right? Just in recipes or something doesn't matter. But up until now, if you're fixing an infant cereal, you want to use formula breast milk. A lot of people freeze their breast milk. You want to continue to have that be the primary milk that they get, right? And so that at age 1, then you can change that around if you want to. Really good question. Okay, the next one is, how old are kids supposed to be before we give them anything besides breast milk or formula? Now, make some notes here, because the guideline, and I see this over and over again, and then I see people arguing with it. The guideline, and this is going to be endorsed in the new dietary guidelines, is to wait until around 6 months of age to give kids any other items besides breast milk or formula, and then to start. So you want to start. You don't want to wait. You want to start, but the number is 6 months. But the loosey-goosey part is there may, and we'll talk about this later, but there may be some kids that are ready a little earlier. They may be ready because they're kind of mature and they're acting like they can eat and they can sit up really well and they've got eye-hand coordination and they're showing interest in all these things we'll talk about. So they may be ready. And one other reason, which I'll talk about again, is in families with high risk for allergies, like peanut allergies, it seems like the kids are safer if they get those allergenic foods before 6 months. Did y'all get all that? So it's complicated. 6 months is usually good. A lot of kids aren't ready till 6 months. It seems to cover most nutritional needs. However, maybe a little earlier might help protect against allergies. We have a whole lecture on that. So the actual practice, and it's really before 6 months when we go, oh wow, that is way too, before 4 months, that is way too soon. Nobody agrees with before 4 months, okay? All the literature, yet people do it, okay? And so before 4 months, the actual practice is more than 40% are fed solid foods. So people are giving their infants solid foods too soon. Why do we care? Okay, well, first, who does this? Infants who are formula fed are more likely to get solids early on. And it's also a practice that's associated with women with less education, if they're single or they're young mothers. And what they say, why they do it, is sadly a healthcare professional told them to. And I've got highly educated friends who go to really good doctors who tell them to start giving their kids Cheerios at 3 months. So they're the pediatricians sometimes are just not paying attention to this stuff. And then some parents feel like the kid's just old enough, hungry, and they want them to sleep longer. The studies show that giving kids food too soon doesn't help them sleep longer. What it may do is increase their risk for obesity. So please write that down. Offering food before 6 months can increase the risk for child obesity. Okay, we good? All right, what about these guys? Same thing, yeah.
Did you say that giving foods to infants would help them sleep longer, or was that?
No. Okay, thank you so much. Here's why people do it. So thank you, that's such a good way to ask that question. Reasons that parents say they offer foods too soon. So maybe we should address this. Reasons that parents offer foods too soon. They say because their healthcare professional told them to, and they're hoping they'll sleep longer. But they don't. Is that clear now? Beautiful. Okay, so let me talk about sleep for a minute. Sleep is a huge issue because, for long-term health, infants need to be sleeping a really long period of time. They need to learn how to sleep. When they're newborn, they wake up every 2 hours. It's a nightmare for the parents. I go and help my daughter and her son, so we do 2-hour shifts with this baby that has to be held all the time. It's kind of rough, right? And so they at first they need to be held, and then you can start training them to sleep in a crib. And there's actually a training process that works pretty well. A lot of parents don't do that, and they don't learn to teach their kid to sleep. Some people have 2-year-olds that get up every hour and a half, and it's bad for their health, and the parents are pulling all of their hair out, and it's not helpful for training. So we want kids to sleep and learn to sleep, but adding food too early is not a solution. We'll talk about that more later too. Okay, what about these guys? So again, I have the topics up here in purple or whatever this color is, so we can talk about them separately. Guideline for sweets. I'm going to show you a whole slide on this later, but here's your sugar. You're hungry. Not before age 2. This is a guideline, and again, this is a guideline, a consensus, mostly from the American Heart Association. They were the ones that came up with this guideline because they track infant diet into cardiovascular disease risk in adults. And they know sugar is a problem, and this can metabolically sabotage the kid's growth early on. So actually, the recommendations are no sugar. But here's the actual practice. Okay, why don't we want sugar? Well, it replaces other foods, and it has them thinking that everything should taste like this. And then so it's hard to get them to eat broccoli. Really, if kids are used to eating, donuts and stuff, they're just a mess. So let's look at actual practice here. 9 to 12 months, desserts are common. 12 to 24 months, this is the norm. Okay, so people quickly shift from these baby foods when they're trying to do it right in the first 6 months or 12 months to all bets are off. And since we have a pediatric obesity crisis, this is really serious. It's a norm that needs to change. Okay, so this is what people are doing now. Vegetables. The guideline is daily with variety. You know why, right? Somebody throw out a reason why kids should eat vegetables.
For vitamins and minerals and nutrients.
There you go, because they're good for you. They also have fiber. And here's a weird one. You may not think of it this way, but they displace unhealthy foods. So if you were going to try to eat healthy and not eat unhealthy foods, what are you going to do? You got to pick something, right? And so the American diet is filled with packaged stuff. And so if you're not going to have if you're not going to have a pizza for dinner, what are you going to eat? Okay, then you start thinking, well, it's some kind of lean meat or fish and then some vegetables. And so you start thinking in terms of whole foods. Okay, and so this gets people set on the right practice. So, but here's the practice. A lot of kids never get vegetables.
We had some comments about sweets. The first one was, what does SSB stand for?
Oh, I am so sorry and thank you. Sugar sweetened beverages. I'm so used to using this because I write articles about it, so I apologize. The SSB is sugar sweetened beverage.
And then the next one was a clarification on no sweets at all until 2 years.
Yep. Yes. Not before age 2.
I actually have a question as well.
Okay.
So I understand why we are learning what the actual practices are, but are we going to be tested on that? Or are we just going to be tested on what the guideline is?
Okay. What I'm trying to do is paint a picture, and I'm sorry, I understand why you want to ask about the test questions, and I get that. What I'm trying to do, besides just giving you bare bones facts, you have to know these 5 things, is to paint a story So you have context, you can understand the background and what's going on in the United States. And so am I going to say 12 to 24 months, what percent consume sweets? No, because that's ridiculous. I agree with you. But you do need to know that kids are getting sweets way too early and way too often, and it's way too much of a norm. So in that respect, something around 80% is a useful number for you to know because you can describe this to somebody else. Does that make sense? So I'm trying to paint a picture, and I only give you the numbers because I want you to know this comes from studies. Otherwise, I would just say most kids get this, most kids do that. But when I build these lectures, I read all the current scientific articles that have looked at what kids are eating and when and why, and put these in here so you have the best state of knowledge that we have. And your book does a good job, but textbooks are always a couple, 3 years behind because the production time. So they get printed and then they stay in print for like 3 years and then they move on. Whereas it's my fervent desire to provide y'all with the most current information so that you leave this class with that background. So back to your question, am I going to ask you these numbers? No, but I do want you to understand the trends. Does that help? Is that fair enough? I want to make sure that feels fair enough.
It does. I think this is the first class that I've had where we're given numbers specifically like this instead of just guidelines, and it really does help me, at least personally, to kind of understand what the actual trends are. So I do appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's cool. But I like some numbers. Like I want you to know how much iron kids need, things like that, and I generally tell you that. But these numbers are just so you get your head around it. But not before age 2 is a definite, right? Yeah, I absolutely want everybody to know that. Good questions. I appreciate them, Stephanie. Keep them coming. Don't feel like you don't want to ask questions, because we can't communicate any other way. This is our time, right? Okay, so vegetables we've talked about. We need to eat them. They're good for you. And energy. Now the guideline is I'll give you specifics soon, but the guideline really is don't eat too much, okay? Eat enough calories to support growth. And that's gonna depend on the size of the kid, the activity of the kid, the age of the kid, and I'll give you that information coming up. But what I wanted you to know is the actual practice here is that it's very common for kids to eat too many calories. And this will come up again, but I've done some studies in San Marcos because we have an obesity crisis very much so among our population. And so I've done research with WIC and child care centers and so forth and looked at how much they're eating. Like I call the parents, I'll tell you about how to do this, but what you do is you enroll people in a study. They agree to be in the study and you say, I'm gonna call you and ask you what your kid ate yesterday. And ask them to do that a couple of times. And it's actually the same method that's used by all these researchers. So I've done it in San Marcos. So from those studies, I've been able to find out what kids in San Marcos are eating. Some of them are eating as many calories as I need for a day. So, and one of the downsides of being an older woman, I'm not gonna say old, but older woman, is every year you get fewer and fewer calories to maintain your same weight. You can exercise more, but you still have to eat fewer calories because your body just wants to go, let's sit on the couch, right? So it's hard. But it's hard for me to not go over my calorie requirements, but these kids are eating what I need and they're little, right? So some kids go over this, and you can imagine the food. You guys know what the food supply is like, right?
Dr.
That's why you're here.
Dr. Patel, I have a question.
Yeah.
What about like growth spurts? Or I have a 10 and a 12-year-old, and there will be times where, can you hear me?
Yeah, you said what about, you have a 10 and 12-year-old, I heard that.
So I have a 10 and a 12-year-old, and I'm asking about growth spurts. Like there will be certain times where they seem to be eating a lot of food. Yeah, as much food as I'm eating, as many calories as I seem to be eating, or if not more. So I guess I'm just wondering, I mean, does that come into play where they're, maybe their body's going through a growing period, and then it's just requiring a lot more energy?
Yeah, so don't worry. The one thing, we're going to get to that age group. This is the little guys. Okay, so we build it up, right? So these are the little guys, and then we'll go to pregnancy, and then we'll get into older kids. And I promise we'll do that. But the reason I bring up calories, I don't overstate calories. I don't talk about calorie restrictions. I don't live my life as a calorie restrictor. I don't believe in restricting kids or other people or any of this kind of stuff, because what we do best with is if we eat real food as much as we can, as much produce as we can probably fit in there, and healthful foods, and then calm down. Okay, so this is not, I don't mean this to come off sounding like a iron fisted, this is the only way it should happen. The problem with this age group is the trajectory for childhood obesity risk starts before age 5. And if we're overfeeding them at 0 to 2 years, they're likely to have trouble with obesity by age 5, and then it tracks throughout their life. And obesity is not the only outcome measure. I mean, I know there's so many more things that are important, but this is why I harp on this here, because, and I harp on this here because what parents often do, and I'm not trashing parents, I hang around them, I know what their lives are like. But what they often do, because they're at their wits' end, or their kids are in school, or they have this, or they don't have money, is they end up doing things like macaroni and cheese for lunch, pizza for dinner. Why? Because the kids will eat it, they enjoy it. What's wrong with it? It's high in fat, it's low in fiber, it doesn't have any vegetables in it, and it's very salty. Okay, so the kinds of foods that are norm in the United States are they're contributors to our problem. So it's the energy density. These kids should be eating a variety of foods, not low-fat foods, a variety of foods that are healthy foods, like beans and avocados and fish and all the things that you guys know about. So it wasn't directed at kids that age. And people, and to answer your actual question, when they, a lot of times kids eat a lot and then grow up. They grow out and they grow up. They grow out and they grow up. That's a normal growth spurt thing. And we can plot them to see that, but sometimes kids grow out, but they don't grow up. And it can have to do with past feeding practices, not getting enough activity, maybe eating too high calorie foods at this particular time. So it's always a dance a little bit. And I imagine you guys have had to, all of us adults have had to go through this dance ourselves if we're trying to be as healthy as possible. What can I eat, right? Can I eat Pop-Tarts on Friday because they're really good? Or is that going to, what can I do? And what should I feed my kids? It's just that kids don't have a voice, so we have to figure it out for them. Did I get at that, Carrie?
You did. I think sometimes, we're talking and I'm like, oh yeah, this is this age group. So yeah, you did, and I appreciate that. I probably could just flood you with questions and not because I will get you off
Here's
track.
the invite. Here's the invite. We'll get to it later. But if you want to talk sometime, book an office hour. Let's talk. I am here. I don't go in. I go out to exercise and then I sit in my house all day. So let's set it up, okay? You guys are all welcome to do that. It would take the place of us seeing each other in the hallway, right? Or after class, where we could talk for a few minutes. Because this is usually when I get these questions from people, and since we're, isolated, we need to do it that way.
Somebody also made a comment about how parents encouraging their kids to clean their plate could attribute to.
Absolutely, that could contribute to obesity for sure too. We all probably had that stuff. We'll talk about this. So this lecture is about current practices and requirements. The following one is about how to do it right. The rest of this lecture is going to talk about what's the right way to feed your kids. Should you pressure them? Should you make them take bites? Should you make them sit in their table till they're done all that? We're going to get into that. So thank you for caring, because knowing what is one thing, knowing how to do it's entirely something else. And that's true as an adult too, right? I know what to eat. Do I always do it? Well, I try, but I'm not always perfect at it. So same thing for kids. So we'll talk about that. Good questions. Okay, so sodium, same stuff as before, but we have too much salt in our population, and you know, hypertension starts at young ages. They're learning it's a serious problem. So in fact, the requirement for sodium is really low in the early years. And people, when you start giving kids table foods is when you really run into trouble. Look at a box of macaroni and cheese one day. Just do that for me. Okay, look at the sodium and see if how much of that you can eat before you top out. Okay, so this next section is key energy and nutrient requirements. So I made this actually for, we gave a virtual shower for Dr. Johnson. When she had her, Cassandra Johnson, one of our faculty members, had a baby this summer, so we had a virtual shower. So again, this is her second kid, so this was my slide for her, just this part was good. So first baby, I make the hummus from scratch because I worry about the salt content of store-bought, which I still believe in. And then the second baby, this is a picture of my son. It's the only time he went to McDonald's, okay, in his entire babyhood. But we were traveling across the country, and McDonald's had a place where you could actually get out of the car, and so he's eating French fries. So second kid, yeah, first kid, you know, you boil the hummus or do whatever. So anyway, we do our best. Darn it. Okay. Daily requirements for energy and protein are met or exceeded. So these numbers I have, let me highlight, because I know you guys want to know what you need to know. So I tried really hard to give you some ballpark numbers. Okay, so these are numbers you've seen before. 108 calories per kilogram, and for 0 to 12 months. Oh, this should be 7 to 12 months. That's a typo. 7. Speaking of not being perfect. Kristen, will you remind me to fix this on my slide in an email so I'll fix it and post the right one? Thank you. So there's fewer calories per kilogram. And so what you're realizing as they get older, they don't need to use much per body weight. This is a number I would like you to know. Toddlers 1 to 2 years get 1,000 to 1,400 calories per day. Why do I want you to know this? Because on the one hand, that's a lot of food, and that's fine. We don't need to diet or starve kids. We need to give them healthful choices and let them pick what to have. Okay, and healthful choices can include things like bringing bean burritos and breakfast tacos. It doesn't just have to be all the pure foods in the world, it can be mostly that. But they may need a lot. On the other hand, they don't need 2,000. So just a ballpark figure for you to put in your head.
Before we move on to protein, somebody asked, what's the guideline for sodium?
I didn't give you the DRI. Now I'm going backwards. I will give you the DRI. The guideline is just, no, don't go over the AI, but I'm going to look it up and make sure I give you the right guideline. So let me do that. I'll do it. Kristen, write me in that email and I'll plug it in here and write everybody an announcement. The guideline is you don't want to add salty foods to anything. You don't add salt to food. There's enough salt naturally in food. But I'll tell you the numbers so you have that. Thank you. Okay, protein. The numbers I want you to know, look at 7 to 12 months to 1 to 3 years. So between 7 months and 3 years, they only need 13 grams of protein a day. Do you remember how much protein is in a cup of milk?
8
That's
grams.
right. That's right. So if they're between 1 and 3 and they're getting 2 cups of milk, we're done, right? This is part of the argument against milk is maybe we need a variety of foods to fill these protein requirements. Did I mention earlier that too much protein can cause too much growth, rapid growth? I think I had that in my infant lecture. My intention was to do that. I want you to know here that the protein requirements are relatively low. Okay, this is not much food. So parents tend to overfeed their kids protein. Here's how you do it. You go through McDonald's or Wendy's or something and you order chicken nuggets. Those are super high in protein and fat too, right? They're fried or whatever's in them. So let's say they get up and have milk, maybe have an egg for breakfast, have milk for lunch, whatever they have, and then eat this stuff. They're usually going to be 2 or 3 times their DRI for protein. It's really easy to go over. And I think what a common concern is parents think, well, I need to eat a high protein diet. I'm dieting, you know, I'm eating a keto diet, ketone diet, keto diet. I'm not saying we should. I'm just saying that's what they do. Because they're going, well, let's have the kid do it too. It can't be bad for the kid, but it is bad for the kid. They need to be eating a variety of foods, which we'll talk about. We'll give you some meal plans in a bit.
Somebody asked, by too much growth, do you mean obesity?
Yeah, I do. So when we have a whole lecture on child obesity. So it's hard to get all this stuff in the right order because we come at it from different directions, but we'll have a lecture on that and we'll talk about what the growth rate is. But remember earlier we talked about if you follow a chart line, you know, on the chart, you're following a growth line. And if sometimes kids fall down, and that's failure to thrive, they cross 2 lines and go down in their growth rate. Sometimes they cross 2 lines and go up. So we'll talk about this. So kids, instead of following their trajectory, they can start edging up. That's what I mean by too much, is they're getting off of what their normal trajectory should be. Very good question, you guys. Thank you for caring. Okay, so a little bit of this is redundant, but repeat is not a bad thing. Infants need iron. And we've talked about these numbers, and I like you to know these numbers. These are numbers that matter. I will ask iron requirement numbers on the test. Okay? 0 to 6 months. That's a small number, right? 7 to 12 months. How much bigger is that number? We talked about this last time. It's a lot bigger, right? So why is it so low right here? And then boom, as soon as they start eating food, it goes way up. The reason is they are born with iron stores from the pregnancy, a healthful pregnancy. They are born with enough iron stores to keep them in good iron health up to about 4 to 6 months. So they're ready. Okay, but at this point, so they're fine in this low amount in breast milk. But around 4 to 6 months, they may run out of stores. We've already talked about this. Breast milk is not high in iron. And so, you know, some physicians suggest they take iron drops. This could happen. As a dietitian, I might or might not recommend it. If I was talking to a family and they were asking about their infant, I would ask history questions. I would say, well, so your child, how was your child fed? And how was your pregnancy? Did you experience anemia? Did you experience gestational diabetes? Did you experience any of these things we need to work about, right? So anemia would be one. Was the baby premature? So if mom was anemic, the baby was premature, then I'd be thinking, yeah, iron may be an issue. But if it was a term birth, and she wasn't anemic, it's probably fine. So it's not necessarily a one size fits all recommendation. So this is why we use words like may begin to deplete, and if in doubt, add iron drops. Okay, and also iron-rich complementary foods, which we're going to talk about a lot. And as they get older, so they don't really get their deficiency here. They don't become deficient yet. They set the stage, and they become, if they're going to set the stage, and by the time they're 12 to 18 months is when they may show that iron deficiency anemia. So this is just when their stores are depleted. They still have enough red blood cells, but they're running into trouble. Okay, so 7 to 12 months, look at the change. Now we're serious. What this means is this is right at the start of complementary feeding. And what this means is let's add iron-rich foods. Trying to figure out what to feed kids, feed them iron-rich foods. Critical. Have we talked about why iron deficiency is so serious? What happens to a kid that's iron deficient for several years?
have issues with blood clotting?
No, that's vitamin K. So vitamin K is blood clotting. So what does iron do?
Doesn't it result in permanent damage cognitively?
Yeah, that's the deal. Okay, if they don't have enough iron during this critical period of growth, then they don't make the right neurotransmitters and they may experience permanent cognitive damage as measured by a few lower IQ points. So we're serious. Now, toddlers need a little bit less because they accumulate their iron and then they're less likely to develop deficiency. So here's my figures on here. Here's some examples of iron-rich foods. You know, I mentioned to you that I am not a meat eater or a chicken eater or a pork eater. However, a lot of people are, and the infant diet may benefit from meats. If you're not averse to offering meats to your kids, this is appropriate. So I looked for something that was beef and beef broth instead of, you guys look at all this stuff, there's beef and gravy, there's all these weird things that are just full of starches and additives, and you don't want to go there. And also WIC provides baby food meats, simple like chicken and stuff like that, they provide that. So that's a good way to help. Salmon, I like salmon because it's not only the iron, but also omega-3 fats. Beans and legumes will work. Eggs have pretty good bioavailable iron, so they help. And then also, here is a baby cereal that's fortified. You can see with iron. They usually have with iron and zinc. Now, I want you to notice something, which I'm going to bring up again. What kind of cereal is this? Can you read it?
Oatmeal.
Yeah, it's oatmeal, and it says oatmeal, and it says baby cereal. You know what it's not? It's not rice cereal, and it's not for older people. This is a baby food cereal. This is what you want to recommend to parents because it's going to, and I look for a hippie brand, but you can find probably a Gerber brand that works fine, but it's got oatmeal and they fortify it and it's made for babies. Okay, if you instead fed a kid cereal for adults, it have too many nutrients in it. Think about things like Total cereal, they're fortified for adults. And that's not what we want to do. And they don't have as much iron. These cereals are designed to have enough iron to help prevent iron deficiency anemia, and they work. So a combination of these types of foods make the world of difference for providing iron during complementary feeding. Anybody care about the rice comment? If you don't care, I'll tell you. But it won't be fast.
I'd like to hear about the rice. Why not?
Thank you. Somebody cares. Okay. Now I forgot what I was going to say. Okay, rice. Rice cereal. Rice is an interesting grain in that it has an unusual amount of arsenic in it. It just absorbs arsenic from the soil compared to other plants, other grains.
Do all rices have that? Or
Most of them do. I'll give you a reference on this. Most of them do. There's a few examples where they don't, but most of them do. There's some, I think I can give you the site. There's a Consumer Reports site on this. I show it in class all the time. So that doesn't mean you should never have rice, but if you're going to feed your kid one cereal or try to help them with their iron, don't make it one that's rice. And your book says to offer rice, and this annoyed me. I told you sometimes books are 2 or 3 years behind. So avoid rice, cereals. And then I'll provide that Consumer Reports link for you guys so you can take a look. All right, so you have a pretty good idea. Why does iron matter? Cognitive function, right? Big deal. Does breast milk provide enough? Depends on the kid. Do we start worrying about 4 to 6 months? Yes. Do we want to make sure the first complementary foods we offer provide iron? Yes. Do you have some examples? Okay, so that's the kind of question I like to ask, and that's the kind of answer I like. Okay, and I like to ask you, what's the difference in requirements for iron from 0 to 6 months and then for the older kids? And how do you fix this problem? Why does it go up so much? Because their stores run out. Okay, so their stores run out, so you can't count on those stores that they made early on. And this is why a junk food diet is a bad idea. Because if you're eating, junk food, you're not eating this stuff. Okay? All right, why do we care? Iron deficiency anemia. This spells out all the problems with respect to iron. This may not seem like a lot of toddlers, but it is a lot of people. 7% of US toddlers are deficient and 2% have iron deficiency anemia. And this is another example of a health disparity. When I say 15% among various groups, it's often low-income Americans where the kids, and sometimes people of color, where the kids have a greater risk for iron deficiency anemia or iron deficiency. So this is an example of a health disparity, and this means that we need to make sure that this information is spread across all groups and in user-friendly ways. Who's at risk for iron deficiency? Too much milk. Milk, cow milk. Cow milk is low in iron and it's filling. If kids start a cow milk habit, they can drink too much cow milk. They're getting too much protein and not enough iron. Some kids go from the bottle to formula to guzzling down cow milk, kind of the same way, and it can be too much. So a low iron diet, food insecure, they're in food poverty, these are the people that are at risk. And as we mentioned, the consequences on our discussion the last slide, permanent cognitive impairment. Permanent. Like if you're right, I hope you're taking good notes, but just circle that because this is the primary issue with iron. So what do? We limit the guidelines on cow milk. This is actually, in my opinion, too high, but everybody says 2 cups per day. So, and so you heard my rationale because it also has a lot of protein in it, but this is an upper limit. We used to say 3 cups per day and kids were getting anemic. So we're trying to put a cap on it, put a cap on cow milk. If kids have had iron deficiency, then they need to be looked at. We usually don't even test until 12 months. So what may happen is a parent may go, man, my kid's cranky, they don't have a good appetite, and let's see you're doing well. They go in and check their iron and it's already too late. They've already started downhill. So if they find out they're anemic at 12 months, then they'll check again later. And in the meantime, they'll keep checking to see if they catch up. But this is not the situation parents want to get in. And one more thing about this. This is assuming that people have access to healthcare and can take their child in and get regular checkups and have their iron looked at. And this is not a privilege everybody has. We don't have universal healthcare in the United States, and a lot of kids get kicked under the rug for this. So it's a big deal. What do you do if a kid has anemia? Give them iron drops, counsel the parents, keep screening and keep trying. So iron drops is one way, and I used to have all the numbers on here, but you don't need to know that. Just they can get a prescription for iron drops. The counter iron drops. You can also eat iron-rich foods, and then help the parents figure this out.
Is there any research on like what happens to kids if they don't drink cow milk?
Yeah, but I don't have it at the top of my head. What I will say is the consensus is we don't have to have a milk. You can. I know I sound a little anti-milk, and I am kind of, because I think we prioritize dairy over other things because we've marketed to a lot. There's a lot of healthy foods out there that aren't dairy products. Okay, so it's okay to have some dairy products. It's okay to do that, but we just don't want that to be the mainstay. And so if people don't want to have it, they're okay. Now, what you do see is if you have vegan, and I'll talk about this later, vegan parents versus a more varied diet, sometimes the vegan kids don't grow as much. So we'll get to that later.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, here's another nutrient, vitamin D. This is a repeat, but this is more for toddlers, so we threw in some pictures. Okay, so infants, you already know this. How do they get their 400 IU? It says it right here.
Breastfeeding.
Yeah, if they breastfeed, they don't get enough. Remember, vitamin D is deficient in breast milk. So breastfeeding
Drops come from?
Yeah, so you want to give them, they need supplements like vitamin D drops. You could write that right here, supplements, circle that, go vitamin D drops until age 1, or mom can take a high dose of vitamin D. This is a repeat from the information we talked about before. A breastfeeding mom, if she takes this much vitamin D, it is not shown to cause toxicity, and it provides enough vitamin D in her milk. If the baby consumes formula, they're fine because vitamin D is added already. And when kids start drinking cow milk, if they do, they get their vitamin D from cow milk and other dairy products. I will not ask you the amount here, but one of the reasons that dairy is recommended to kids is because it's got vitamin D added to it. It's supplemented there as well. Okay, it's not a naturally occurring, it occurs naturally in small amounts, but we add vitamin D to milk. So we add it to formula, we add it to milk, and we give it to breastfed babies.
So throughout this, the entirety of this slide, we're talking about whole milk, correct?
Yeah, we're not dealing with anything else yet. Okay.
I have a question.
Yeah.
When we talk about IU, can you explain, I actually don't know what the difference is between milligrams per day and IU.
Yeah, there's a factor of 40. So milligrams per day is you divide this by 25, I think. I think the factor is 25. So Kristen, you're still here? Write me a note and I'll follow up with this too. So I give that to you in an email.
I think she left.
All right. Oh, wow. I'm going to have to think on my own here. What you're going to see is international units or milligrams. Most of the supplements say international units, so it's what we go by. But we also can see milligrams on there. So usually the values are going to be both. But I will add a slide, add a explanation for this to supplement this. Okay, look at the foods I have here. I've got milk. Salmon also has vitamin D. Salmon ends up being, if you can afford it, a pretty nice food because it's got iron, it's got vitamin D, it's got omega-3 fats. Butter has vitamin D added to it, and eggs have naturally occurring vitamin D. But what's going on here is we don't have a lot of natural food sources for vitamin D. So you can also get fortified orange juice, for example, which I wouldn't really give to little kids, but you can get fortified products. Some of the alternate milks have vitamin D added to it. Okay, but and the big issue here is we used to get our vitamin D from the sun. If we were in a climate, close enough to the equator to have enough sun exposures. So we get our vitamin D because we make it in our skin. So we're fine. However, we're not fine because 1, we don't spend as much time outside anymore. 2, we're told to wear sunscreen, which stops it. 3, we may have darker skin, which also stops vitamin D production. 4, we may live up north and wear coats all the time. So there's all these reasons why our skin's not making enough vitamin D, and so it becomes a nutrient that we actually need to consume.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
I can't remember, but did you say that if the mother is taking a prenatal vitamin, that the vitamin D requirement would be fulfilled through that in her
No,
breast?
I don't think it is.
Okay.
Most prenatals don't have this much. This is a very high, 6,400 I use a very high dose. It's over the UL. It's safe. It's over the UL. It works, but I don't think it's going to be that much in prenatals. So this is why we study this in our program, because the entire world needs to know how to feed their kids. And this is a class where you get it. All right, so that's why I kind of pound in these ideas. So you realize that vitamin D is an issue. Vitamin D needs to be consumed. Iron is an issue. Iron needs to be consumed. Supplements matter when it comes to vitamin D. So that's, I harp on this stuff a lot, and I hope it's not boring, but I try to be a little repetitive so you get the picture when you walk away. You know, what are the problem nutrients for kids? And you have a good feel for that.
I know they found that 6,400 milligrams a day doesn't do anything, but doesn't it seem like it would be smarter just to go with the drop route, just in case?
Okay, you said milligrams and you mean IU. I don't think so. Because the study, I've read several studies on this, and the studies have shown no, you know, what we look for with vitamin D excess doses. And so this is, if you guys care about this, I have stories about this kind of thing. So when they set the UL up in the beginning, we thought of vitamin D as being like the, you know, all the fat soluble vitamins, well, they're stored in your fat and then they're going to cause toxicity and it's a big deal. And so we set those ULs kind of low, but we thought that there'd be more toxicity, like from vitamin D, which would be calcification of soft tissue. So like your muscles would have calcium deposits in it and you'd be in pain and stuff like that. And if you take way too much all the time, you can run into trouble, but this amount has not, even though it's over the UL, has not been shown to cause calcification of soft tissue or anything else. So, but what you just asked is I gave you my opinion, okay? Yeah. And that's an opinion based on what I've read. It doesn't mean it's an absolute truth. An absolute truth may not know.
Well, no, that's why I asked, because I did believe that fat-soluble vitamins could have toxicity. And so it is interesting to see that they've found a number that doesn't cause toxicity.
Yeah, it is. You know, what I'll try to do too is just to give you something to look at. One of the things I do in preparing for class, besides reading current literature and reading your book again, is I look at the nutritional fact sheets put out by the government. And they're pretty good about talking about current issues. And so I'll post some of that too. So if you want to take another look at how much do we care about the IU, then you can take a look at that.
Okay, thank you.
So, yeah, but yeah, what you're asking is do we have an absolute answer? Perfect answer, I think. I mean, I think that's in essence what you're asking. And my answer is no. This seems like a good idea. It's been shown to work. Are we absolutely sure that it's safe for mom? You know, I think we're sure, but we may not be. You know, 5 years from now, somebody may go, you know, look what happened when people had 6,400, you know. So nutrition is frustrating because it's always changing, and it's fun to study because it's always changing, and it's fascinating. It's a spectacular science, but everything is not black and white. And once you get comfortable with that, then you can calm your family down. When they, you know, don't your family talk to you and they go, wait, does fiber cause colon cancer or not? Or does it protect? Tell me what. Nutrition people are always bad. You go, well, it depends on how the study's set up and where the fiber comes from and what people and what the outcome markers are. So we keep learning more and more about nutrition as time goes by, and our understanding gets more sophisticated, and I can comfortably say this is a good practice. Does it mean that forevermore I will say this? No, sometimes I read something 5 years later and go, yeah, I changed my mind here. This is what, right now, this is the current state of knowledge. That I promise you. When I give you information in the classes, I validate and verify it's a current state of knowledge. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Because what's fun about nutrition is you're a lifelong learner. Okay, so it's painful, but it's also really fun. So you learn how to write this paper now and study this stuff. Then you've got this background, and then you've got scaffolding to build on with new information when more studies come out. That's the plan. Okay, so I'm going to stop on sugar here because I think it's a good time. We've talked without a break. It's 12:15. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing, stop recording.